to use than the One M8. Both devices have similarly sized displays, but the iPhone 6 is 30 grams lighter, half an inch shorter, 3 millimeters narrower, and a crazy 2.5 millimeters thinner. You could then argue that the One M8 has more pixels on the display, but seriously, the difference is really hard to perceive. When it comes to comfort, size does matter, and even though none of these devices have thin bezels, the fact that there is a full inch of separation between the bottom of the One M8 and the user interface can be uncomfortable from time to time. The boom sound speakers surely make this experience worth it, but you spend more time typing on a phone than listening to the speakers, and in that sense, the iPhone single speaker is actually second on my list when it comes to sound quality and loudness. The software experience did make my choice difficult. HTC Sense 6 is still one of my favorite user interfaces ever, and I'm not just comparing it to other Android skins. From the unlocking gestures to the aesthetics of Sense 6, it's really hard to find anything to not like here. One of my favorite features is the different filters you find when navigating on HTC applications, something which should clearly be part of iOS 8 and is not. Now don't get me wrong, iOS 8 is so far my favorite version of iOS ever, and I do agree with Michael's statement that this OS was definitely made with bigger screens in mind. Apple's new zoomed out mode makes full use of the new screen real estate, and the iPhone 6 handles everything without a stutter. The inclusion of third-party keyboards, new health services, and widgets on the notification tray are really just cherry toppers. iOS 8 has matured, and it is clear with this update on the iPhone 6. Again, it's hard to declare a winner when it comes to software. If you're an Android fan, HTC Sense 6 is by far my favorite user interface. And if you're an iPhone fan, well, it's not like you have much of a choice either. Now, things got tricky for the HTC One M8 when it comes to my overall user experience. Again, the iPhone 6 is much more comfortable to use, but then the second reason that made me switch is, repeat after me, the camera. Speed used to be my favorite feature when it came to the HTC One M8 since it's faster than fast on taking a shot, but Apple's new Focus Pixel technology does the same thing. Once you compare the resulting shots, you'll notice that both cameras take amazing photos in daylight, even though HDR mode is more vibrant on the One M8. The same can be said about night shots, where both devices do a decent job without optical limit stabilization, but where the One M8 has an extra kick when it comes to HDR. I'm not a fan of how HTC overexposes photos at times, but I do know people that actually like that. My biggest problems remain in the megapixel count, where you sometimes find yourself too far from a subject and want to zoom into it. And in that department, only the iPhone 6 will help you. Surely the One M8 takes better selfies, but I wish I could say the same about the primary camera. When it comes to real-world use, I'm not going to bore you with specifications. Both devices sport the cream of the crop when it comes to specs and internals, and you can see this in the way they handle games and your average use. I have no complaints on either department, and I am sure you won't too. Where I do notice a difference is in signal strength, something which matters a lot to me. You may mock the iPhone's antenna design, but I find the device to hold on to Wi-Fi on a faraway router a lot better than the One M8, and I also find it more reliable in retaining data connection on sectors with bad service. When it came to phone calls, I found the experience to be pleasant on both phones, and callers really did feel the same and couldn't tell the difference, even with the boom sound speakers. I also found battery life to be similar on both devices.
There's no question about that. But you will need to inspect your display very carefully to experience this extra bit of sharpness, which most people won't do. It's very important to stress the point that most people won't notice any sort of difference between these two displays in their day-to-day use. Bottom line is that both screens will render equally good viewing angles, great color contrast, and brightness. Again, if you get all scientific and measure all the variables, you will find that in some cases the iPhone will score higher, and in another department the M8 will score higher. But why go to such lengths? I have both of these phones and they both look absolutely fantastic. Though we could allow the M8 to steal the win here because of the 1080p display with the higher PPI, since I was a little disappointed not to see 1080p on the iPhone 6 while the 6 Plus got one. Anyway, let's move on to the size and weight. The iPhone 6 measures 138.1 millimeters long, 67 millimeters wide, and 6.9 millimeters thick, and it only weighs 129 grams. The HTC One M8 is 146.4 millimeters long, 70.6 millimeters wide, 9.4 millimeters thick, and 160 grams in weight. The numbers say that the iPhone 6 is definitely the thinner and lighter device of the two. This, of course, is due to the fact that HTC One M8 sports a larger screen of 5 inches, but regardless, iPhone steals the win here. At the expense of a slightly smaller screen, you get an incredibly light and thin phone. Next up is the processor, memory, and storage options. So the HTC One M8 sports a quad-core Snapdragon 801 processor clocked at 2.3 GHz, with 2 GB of RAM and Adreno 330 graphics, while the iPhone 6 sports an Apple A8 dual-core chip clocked at 1.4 GHz with 1 GB of RAM and PowerVR GX 6450 graphics. On paper, it appears that the HTC One M8 is definitely faster, but I will run a processor and memory benchmark at the end of this video to measure the total processing power to see which one produces more raw horsepower. Now, as for storage, the HTC One M8 comes with 16 GB or 32 GB options, with the ability to add an additional 128 GB using a micro SD card, while the iPhone 6 starts at 16 GB with no storage expansion options as usual. If you want more storage, you will have to buy the costlier 64 gigs or 128 gigs iPhone 6. Having that expansion option is a definite plus on the HTC One M8, especially if you're a media hog. Alright, so let's move on to the software, which is a very important comparison category. So the iPhone 6 runs on the latest version of iOS 8, while the HTC One M8 runs on the latest version of Android KitKat, with the famous Sense UI skin running atop Android. When comparing these two phones from a software perspective, everything boils down to the difference between iOS 8 and Android. Now, I cannot go into the details because that would take forever. So what I'll do is I'll give you the two major distinctions between these two operating systems. The first one is customization. Android is known for its customization. By using live widgets and custom home screen replacements, you can tweak the looks of any Android phone to exactly how you want it. Take a look at these HTC One M8 screens that showcase the potential of customization you can achieve on this device. In contrast, iOS 8 doesn't allow for any customization at all other than changing your wallpaper. You have a static lock screen and a static home screen populated with rows of apps and folders. So when it comes to personalization and customization, Android wins hands down. The second category of distinction is the app ecosystems. Apple shines in this department. There's no question that apps that you purchase from the App Store on iOS 8 will be better designed, better optimized, and more fluid than their Android counterparts, which you purchase from Google Play Store. Also, Apple has a greater selection of well-designed games in their App Store, which might be important for smartphone gamers. So basically, if you want to personalize your device to maximum capacity, Android is better. On the other hand, if you're all about the beautifully designed apps that simply work flawlessly, you should go with iOS 8. So what are you? Are you a customization freak, or are you all about beautiful apps? Unfortunately, you cannot have both at the same time. Now, beyond those two differences, both iOS 8 and Android are fantastic operating systems, and that's why they both dominate the smartphone market. But again, it's going to be all about what you want. So let's quickly touch on the battery. There's not much to say here. Both devices offer excellent battery life overall. With a full charge, both phones will offer you a full day of medium to heavy use, but the HTC One M8 will last longer due to its bigger battery. As you know, HTC One M8 has a 2600 mAh battery, whereas the iPhone has a 1810 mAh battery. So that difference is going to give you probably 25% extra battery life on the HTC One M8 as opposed to the iPhone 6. Now let's talk about another important feature, the camera. iPhone 6 has an 8 megapixels rear-facing eyesight camera with phase detection autofocus, capable of recording 1080p video and slow motion video. HTC One M8 has a rear-facing 4 megapixels duo camera also capable of recording 1080p video as well as slow motion video. Now both phones are capable of recording 1080p video at 30 frame rates per second or 60 frame rates per second. However, only the iPhone 6 is capable of recording super slow motion videos at 240 frame rates per second as opposed to 120 frame rate seconds maximum.